A billionaire humiliated a black waitress, then handed her a $5 million trap on live camera. A billionaire mocked a black waitress in front of a room full of power, and the whole world was watching. He thought it was just entertainment, until she picked up the marker. One wrong number, one ruthless challenge, and a truth no one was ready to face. But what silenced the room wasn't the money. It was the moment an invisible woman made everyone finally look. The sterling didn't just glow, it judged. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm gold across polished marble floors, reflecting off glasses that cost more than most people's weekly rent. The hum of quiet conversations drifted between tables dressed in white linen, where Manhattan's most powerful names gathered like they owned not just the room, but the world beyond it. Nina Carter moved through them like she wasn't there. Her black apron was pressed flat against her waist, her tray balanced steady in one hand. She had learned how to disappear years ago, how to lower her gaze just enough, how to step silently between chairs, how to become part of the background so completely that people forgot she existed. "Water," a man snapped without looking at her. Nina nodded, already reaching for the bottle. At the center of the room, a large whiteboard stood beneath a soft spotlight. Next to it, a projection screen glowed with dense rows of numbers. Curves, variables, equations that twisted together like a language most of the room only pretended to understand. Edward Langston stood there, owning the space. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been sculpted onto him. He held a marker like it was a weapon. The room leaned toward him as he spoke, investors hanging on every word. "This model," Edward said, tapping the board, "predicts market instability with unprecedented accuracy. We're talking about anticipating collapse before it even whispers." A few people chuckled, impressed. Phones were already out, recording. Nina passed behind him, placing a tray of appetizers onto a nearby table. She didn't mean to look, but she did. Just for a second, her eyes flicked across the whiteboard, catching a cluster of numbers near the center. A coefficient, small, almost invisible in the chaos of symbols, sat just slightly out of place. Her steps slowed, she blinked once, then again. No. That wasn't right. The sigma and mu, they were reversed. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. It was a tiny error, the kind most people would miss. The kind that didn't look like much, until you understood what it touched. Because that one number didn't sit alone. It fed into everything beneath it. If it was wrong, everything was wrong. Nina kept walking. She set the tray down, picked it up again, walked 2 more steps, stopped. Her heart began to beat louder. Not fast, not panicked, just heavy, like it was asking her a question she didn't want to answer. Don't do it. Every lesson life had taught her whispered the same thing. Keep your head down. Do your job. Survive. She could walk away. No one would notice. No one ever did. Edward's voice continued behind her, confident, smooth. And when we run the projections under stress conditions, the return curve stabilizes at... It was wrong. Nina turned. Her shoes made no sound against the floor as she stepped closer to the board. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the ink clearly, to trace the path of the equation in her mind. Her mouth felt dry. "Excuse me, sir." The room didn't react at first. Conversations continued, glasses clinked. Edward didn't turn. "I think there's an error in your calculation." That did it. Silence didn't fall. It snapped. Edward turned slowly, like someone who wasn't used to being interrupted. His eyes landed on Nina, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her apron, at her hands, at the tray she still held. Then he smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind that cuts. "I'm sorry," he said, voice calm but edged with something sharp. "What did you just say?" Nina swallowed, but her voice didn't shake. "The variance coefficient in the 3rd tier," she said, gesturing slightly toward the board. It's transposed. The sigma and mu values are switched. If you run the model like that, it'll inflate your projections. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone let out a quiet laugh. Edward blinked once, then let out a short, dry chuckle. He turned to the room, spreading his hands slightly. Did everyone hear that? More laughter now, louder. A waitress, he continued, looking back at Nina, is correcting my math. A man at the front table raised his phone higher, zooming in. Nina felt the heat rise in her chest, but she didn't move. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said quietly. I just thought you'd want to. Stop. Edward stepped closer. The distance between them closed in 2 slow strides. Do you have any idea, he said, voice dropping, who you're talking to? Nina didn't answer. He leaned in slightly, not enough to touch, just enough to make the space feel smaller. My team, he continued, includes 12 PhDs from the best institutions in the world. People who have spent their lives studying what's on that board. His eyes flicked over her again. And you're telling me they got it wrong? A ripple of amusement moved through the room. Nina's fingers tightened around the tray. I'm not talking about your team, she said. I'm talking about the number. That made a few heads turn. Edward's smile faded. Just a fraction. Then it came back, sharper. You people, he said, almost casually, can barely keep up with basic arithmetic. A couple of guests laughed louder this time. Can you even read what's on that board? He added. Phones were fully up now, recording. Nina felt every eye in the room on her, felt the weight of it pressing down, trying to bend her, shrink her, erase her. But she didn't step back. Edward reached for the marker and uncapped it with a quick flick. Tell you what, he said, writing a new equation across the board. It stretched long and complicated, layered with symbols that twisted into each other. He turned, holding the marker out towards her. Solve it. The room stilled. If you're so confident, he continued, solve this, right here, in front of everyone. Nina didn't move. And if you can't, he added, voice tightening, you walk out that door, no job, no reference, nothing. A murmur moved through the crowd. Edward's eyes locked onto hers. But if you can, pausing just long enough to let the moment stretch, I'll write you a check. $5 million. The number hit the room like a spark. Gasps, whispers, phones adjusting angles. 5 million. Nina looked at the marker in his hand, then at the board, then at the faces around her, some amused, some curious, most already convinced they knew how this would end. Her chest rose slowly, fell. She set the tray down on the nearest table, reached out, and took the marker. Okay, she said. The word was quiet, but in that silence, it sounded louder than anything else in the room. Edward smiled again, certain, absolutely certain, because in his mind, this was already over. He just didn't know it yet. But Nina did, not the ending. She wasn't arrogant enough to assume that. Not in a room like this. Not in a life like hers. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't guessing. The marker felt light in her hand, almost too light, like it didn't belong to her. The board loomed in front of her, covered in symbols that twisted and folded into each other. Numbers layered over numbers, a maze designed to overwhelm. Behind her, someone laughed softly. 5 minutes, a voice whispered. She won't last 2, another replied. Nina didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She had heard voices like that her whole life. The marker touched the board. And just like that, the room disappeared. Not literally. The chandeliers still glowed. The cameras still blinked red. But in her mind, it all faded into the background. The noise, the judgment, the weight of eyes pressing into her back. It blurred into something distant. Because this she understood. Her hand moved slowly at first, writing small, precise lines. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She simply followed the structure, breaking it apart piece by piece the way she had done 1,000 times before, on scraps of paper, on the backs of receipts, on the cracked tile floor of her kitchen. A young analyst in the second row leaned forward. "That's not random," he murmured. "No," the woman beside him said quietly. "It's not." Nina reached the second line, the third. Her breathing stayed even. Behind her, Edward shifted slightly, crossing his arms. His smile hadn't disappeared, but it had tightened. He leaned toward one of his investors. "She's stalling," he said, loud enough for the front table to hear, trying to make it look convincing, but his voice didn't carry the same certainty it had a minute ago, because Nina hadn't stopped. She isolated a variable, rewrote a boundary condition, simplified a nested integral with a technique so clean it looked almost effortless. The analyst's mouth opened slightly. "She's reducing the dimension," he whispered. "That's not undergraduate work," someone else muttered. Nina paused. Just for a second, her marker hovered over the board as she read the next section again. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening for something beneath the surface. Then she circled a number, right in the middle of the equation. "This is wrong," she said. The room froze. Edward straightened. "Excuse me?" Nina tapped the board lightly. "This constant. It doesn't match the underlying assumptions of the model you built earlier." Edward's smile flickered. "That number," he said carefully, "was verified by my team." Nina didn't turn around. "It shouldn't be 0.07, she said. "It should be closer to 0.043. Otherwise, the decay rate is overstated, and the entire tail distribution compresses." A few people exchanged looks. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. "It means," Nina continued, her voice calm, steady, "your model is telling people the risk is lower than it actually is." The silence deepened. Edward took a step forward. "You're making a lot of assumptions," he said, his tone sharper now. Nina wrote the corrected number, drew a line through the original, then she kept going. She didn't argue, she didn't defend herself, she just solved. And that was worse, because now the room wasn't laughing, they were watching. The silver-haired investor near the front, Richard Calloway, pulled out his phone, tapping quickly. His brow furrowed as he ran the numbers himself. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. He looked up, not at Edward, at Nina, and something in his expression had changed. Edward saw it, he felt it. The shift. It was small, barely noticeable. But in a room like this, power didn't need to move far to be felt. And it wasn't moving toward him. "That's one correction," Edward said quickly, stepping closer. "Anyone can point out a small inconsistency." Nina didn't respond. She was already on the next line. Her marker moved faster now, confidence settling into her hand like it had always been there. Each step connected to the last, building something solid, something undeniable. The analyst stood up without realizing it. "This isn't memorization," he said quietly. "She's rebuilding it." A woman near the back lowered her glass. "Who is she?" she whispered. No one answered, because no one knew, but they were starting to realize they should have. Nina finished the final line. The marker stopped. The room held its breath. She capped it slowly and set it down on the tray beneath the board. Then she stepped back. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The board behind her was covered in her handwriting. Clean, precise, undeniable. Every line connected. Every correction circled. Every flaw exposed. It didn't look like a guess. It looked like an autopsy. Richard Calloway stood. The sound of his chair sliding back cut through the silence. He walked toward the board, adjusting his glasses, studying Nina's work line by line. The room watched him, waited. Because in a place like this, validation didn't come from truth. It came from authority. Calloway reached the corrected constant. Paused, read it again. Then he turned. "She's right." 2 words. That was all it took. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for Edward to feel it like the ground beneath his feet wasn't as steady as it had been 5 minutes ago. His jaw tightened, his hands curled slightly at his sides. "Lucky," he said, but the word sounded thin, because the laughter didn't come back, not this time, and for the first time that night, Edward Langston wasn't the most certain person in the room. Nina Carter was, and that was a problem. Because certainty, in Edward's world, wasn't something you earned. It was something you owned, something you protected, something you never let slip. Not in front of investors, not on camera, and certainly not to a waitress standing in a borrowed apron. The silence stretched, not the comfortable kind. This one pressed against the walls, filled the air between every table, settled into the spaces where laughter had lived just minutes ago. Edward adjusted his cufflinks slowly, buying himself time. "A coincidence," he said finally, his voice measured. "A single correction doesn't prove anything." No one laughed. That bothered him more than the mistake. He turned toward the room, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Anyone can stare at an equation long enough and find a flaw. That doesn't make them. It's not one flaw. Nina's voice cut through him. She hadn't raised it. She didn't need to. She stepped back toward the board, picking up the marker again like it belonged in her hand. Her eyes scanned the equation, not hurried, not uncertain, just focused. Then she circled another number. "And this one feeds into your correlation matrix," she said, tapping lightly, "which means everything downstream is skewed." Edward's jaw tightened. "You're overstepping," he said, but his voice didn't carry, not like before, because now people were listening to her, not him. Nina drew a line from the corrected constant down through the structure of the equation, connecting points that hadn't been connected before. She didn't explain every step. She didn't slow down for the room. She just showed them, quietly, relentlessly. The analyst in the second row stood fully now, abandoning his chair. His eyes followed her marker like it was tracing something sacred. "She's mapping the bias," he said under his breath. She's showing the cascade." A woman beside him whispered, "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, barely blinking, "the entire model could be off." That word hung there, off. In a room where billions of dollars moved on numbers like these, off wasn't small, it was catastrophic. Richard Calloway didn't sit back down. He stepped closer to the board again, his finger tracing Nina's corrections, stopping at each point she marked. His lips pressed into a thin line. Edward watched him, felt the shift deepen. "Richard," he said, forcing a light tone, "you don't seriously think—" Calloway didn't look at him. He was still studying the board. And that was worse than disagreement. That was doubt. Nina finished another line, her handwriting filling the space Edward had left untouched. Her movements were smooth, controlled, like she wasn't performing, wasn't proving anything. She was just fixing it. The room leaned in. Phones adjusted, cameras zooming tighter, the live stream counter ticked higher. 200,000, then 3. A producer in the corner whispered into his headset, "Don't cut. Whatever you do, don't cut." Edward felt the heat rise in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had built this moment, designed it, controlled every variable, the room, the audience, the narrative. It all belonged to him, and now it didn't. Enough. His voice snapped, sharp and sudden. Nina paused, not startled, just aware. Edward stepped forward, closing the distance again. "You've made your point," he said. "You caught a minor inconsistency. Congratulations." A few nervous chuckles surfaced, but they died quickly. Now, he continued, his tone tightening. We can move on. Nina looked at him. Really looked, for the first time since she had stepped up to the board. There was no anger in her expression. No arrogance. Just something quiet, something steady. I'm not done, she said. The words landed softly, but they hit harder than anything else she had said. Edward's smile cracked, just slightly. You don't decide when you're done, he said. I do. A beat passed. Then Nina turned back to the board and kept writing. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. Because something had shifted again. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was about control. And for the first time that night, Edward Langston wasn't the one holding it. Nina moved to the next section of the equation, her marker gliding across the board with quiet precision. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Every line she wrote felt inevitable, like it had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. She stopped. Tapped the board once. This part, she said, assumes static correlations. A few heads turned. That's standard, Edward snapped. For stable markets, Nina replied, but not for what you're modeling. She circled the section, then rewrote it beside the original. If the correlations shift, and they will, your risk estimates collapse. A murmur spread, soft, uneasy. Calloway stepped back slightly, his expression darker now. How much? He asked. Nina didn't look at him. Your model says 15% loss under stress, she said. It's closer to 38. The number hit harder than the first, not because it was bigger, but because it was real. A glass clinked against a table. Someone exhaled sharply. Edward felt something cold settle in his stomach. 38%. That wasn't a rounding error. That was exposure. That was liability. That was ruin. That's speculation, he said quickly, but it didn't sound convincing, not even to him. Because the room had changed. People weren't watching him anymore. They were watching her. Nina finished the line, capped the marker again, and stepped back. The board behind her told the story. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly, too clearly. And for the first time since he walked into the room, Edward Langston had nothing to say. The silence stretched again, but this time, it didn't belong to him. It belonged to the room, and the room had turned. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small, undeniable ways. The kind Edward Langston had built his entire career on reading. A glance held a second too long. A whisper not meant for him. A hand lowering a glass mid-sip. Doubt. It moved through the air like a quiet current. Edward felt it, and he hated it. He straightened his jacket, forcing his shoulders back, reclaiming space that suddenly felt less certain beneath his feet. We're done here, he said, louder now, sharper. This has gone far enough. Nina didn't move. She stood in front of the board, the marker resting lightly in her hand. Her eyes still scanning the equations like they hadn't finished speaking to her. Step away, Edward added, his voice tightening. You've made your point. Nina turned slowly. There was no defiance in her expression. No anger, just that same steady calm. I didn't come up here to make a point, she said. I came up here because it was wrong. The words landed differently now, not as an interruption, as a statement. A few people nodded, barely, almost unconsciously. Edward saw it, and something inside him snapped. You don't get to stand in my presentation, he said, stepping forward, and decide what's right or wrong. I'm not deciding, Nina replied. I'm showing you. The room leaned in again. Edward exhaled sharply through his nose. Fine. If she wanted to play this game, he would end it. All right, he said, turning abruptly toward the projection screen. Let's do this properly. A few heads turned. Edward snapped his fingers once, sharp and commanding. Philip, across the room, his CFO, thin, nervous, already pale, looked up from his laptop. Bring up the full Oracle model, Edward said. Philip hesitated. Grant, that's not the full model, Edward repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Philip swallowed and turned back to his screen. The projection flickered, then expanded. What had been a single equation unfolded into something massive, layers upon layers of interconnected systems, matrices, probability trees, simulations cascading across 17 separate panels. The Oracle, 18 months of work, 12 PhDs, billions of dollars riding on its credibility. The room went still again, but this silence was different. This wasn't curiosity, this was tension, because everyone there understood what Edward had just done. He hadn't just raised the stakes, he had detonated them. Edward turned back to Nina, spreading his hands slightly, as if offering her the entire thing. You want to talk about what's wrong? He said. Let's talk about all of it. Nina's eyes moved across the screen, not overwhelmed, not intimidated, just absorbing. You walk through my model, Edward continued. Every layer, every assumption, every output. He took a step closer. And you find the errors, if there are any. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Edward didn't look away from Nina. "If you're right," he said, "if you can do what you claim, if you can prove this entire model is flawed." He reached into his jacket slowly, pulled out a checkbook. The motion alone shifted the room. "I'll write you a check," he said, his voice calm again, controlled. $5 million, right here, right now. Gasps broke out this time. Not subtle, not restrained. 5 million had been a number before. Now it was real. Paper, ink, binding. Edward let the moment breathe, then his expression hardened. "But if you're wrong," he said quietly. The room leaned closer. "Even once," he added. "Even on a single line." He paused. "You get on your knees," he said, "and you tell this room you're a fraud." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "You apologize," Edward continued. "To me, to everyone watching. And then you walk out that door, and you don't come back." The weight of it settled, heavy, shinala. A man near the back shook his head. "This is too much," he muttered. A woman beside him whispered, "She asked for it." Nina stood still. The projection glowed in her eyes now. Reflections of equations layered across her gaze. 17 panels, thousands of variables, a system designed to take weeks to audit. Edward smiled it again. There it was, control, reasserted, because no one could do this. No one. Not like this, not here, not now. 5 million, Nina said softly. Edward nodded. "The whole world is watching," he added, gesturing toward the cameras. "Don't waste their time." The livestream counter climbed again, 500,000, then more. Comments blurred across the monitors in the corner. Too fast to read. Nina didn't look at them. She looked at the board, then at the screen, then back at Edward. "I'll need more space," she said. The room blinked. "What?" Edward asked. Nina pointed at the whiteboard. "This won't be enough." For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone laughed, nervous, uncertain. Edward's smile froze, because that wasn't fear in her voice. It wasn't hesitation. It was practicality, like she wasn't stepping into a trap, like she was preparing for work. Edward turned sharply. "Get her another board." A staff member hesitated. Now, within seconds, 2 more whiteboards were wheeled in, their clean white surfaces stretching side by side under the chandelier light. The room adjusted, chairs scraping slightly as people leaned for a better view. Phones rose higher, cameras zoomed tighter. Nina stepped forward. 3 boards now, 17 panels on the screen, a room full of power, a world watching. She uncapped the marker again. The sound was soft, but in the silence, it echoed. Edward leaned toward Philip again, lowering his voice. "This ends in 10 minutes, he said. Philip didn't answer. His eyes were on Nina, on the way she was already mapping the structure in her head, on the way she wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, wasn't even blinking. Philip swallowed, because he had seen that look before, in the best minds he had ever worked with. The kind that didn't just solve problems, the kind that saw through them. "Grant," he whispered. Edward didn't hear him, or maybe he didn't want to, because the moment Nina's marker touched the first of the new boards, something shifted again, not in the room, not in the cameras, in the story itself, because this wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a war, and Edward Langston had just invited the only person in the room who might be able to win it. But Nina Carter didn't look like a soldier. She stood in front of 3 blank whiteboards, apron still tied around her waist, a faint smear of ink on her fingers. The chandeliers above cast soft light over her shoulders, but she didn't seem to notice any of it. Her eyes were on the screen, 17 panels, thousands of moving parts. Most people would have seen chaos. Nina saw structure. She lifted the marker and began. The first line she wrote wasn't flashy. It wasn't complicated. It was simple, clean, deliberate. A foundation, a place to stand. The room watched, unsure of what they were seeing. "She's starting from the base?" someone whispered. "She has to," another voice replied. "There's no other way." Edward stood near the head of the table, arms crossed, his posture stiff. He forced his expression back into something calm, something controlled, but his eyes stayed fixed on her hand, on how steady it was. Nina moved to the second line, then the third. Her handwriting was small, precise, each symbol placed with care, like she wasn't writing for the room, but for the problem itself. The analyst who had stood earlier leaned forward again, gripping the back of a chair. "She's rebuilding the assumptions," he said quietly. "She's not even touching the outputs yet." "That's going to take forever," someone muttered. But Nina didn't rush. She didn't glance at the clock, didn't look at Edward, didn't acknowledge the cameras, the whispers, the weight pressing down on her from every direction. Because this was familiar, the hum of a problem, the silence between numbers, the quiet space where everything made sense. Her mind slipped back, not physically, not visibly, but somewhere deeper. A kitchen floor, cold tile beneath her legs, a flickering light overhead, her sister asleep in the next room. A phone propped against a chipped mug, playing a lecture in a voice that kept cutting in and out. She had done this before, not here, not like this, but she had done it, over and over again, when no one was watching, when no one cared, when the only thing at stake was understanding. Her marker moved faster now, the first board filled, clean, no errors, no corrections, just a reconstruction of the model's base layer. She stepped to the second board. The room adjusted with her. Phones shifted, cameras tracked. Edward uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again. "She's stalling," he said under his breath, but his voice lacked conviction, because she wasn't stalling, she was building, and the difference was becoming impossible to ignore. Page 2. Nina paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she read a cluster of parameters. Then she circled one. "Minor inconsistency," she said, almost to herself. Her voice carried anyway. She corrected it in 3 quick lines. Not dramatic, not devastating, but precise. Calloway watched from the front. His expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't question. He just observed. Nina moved on. Page 3. Clean. Page 4. Another pause. Another circle. "This assumption simplifies the correlation structure," she said, still not turning around. "But the assets aren't static. They move." She rewrote the section. 3 minutes, 4 lines. A different approach. The analyst let out a quiet breath. "That's better," he said. A woman beside him glanced over. "Better? It's more accurate." The word hung there. More accurate. Edward felt it land. Felt it settle into the room, because accuracy, in his world, wasn't optional. It was everything. And right now, it wasn't his. Nina kept going. Her rhythm settled into something steady now. Scan, identify, rewrite, move. No wasted motion. No hesitation. The marker squeaked softly against the board. the only consistent sound in the room. Even the air felt quieter, like it was waiting. Page 5. Nina stopped, this time longer, her head tilted slightly, her eyes moving back and forth across the same section. Edward stepped forward. "What is it now?" he asked, his voice tight. Nina didn't answer immediately. She tapped the board once, twice, then she spoke. "You're using a Gaussian copula here," she said. A few heads turned. "That's standard," Edward replied quickly. "For normal conditions," Nina said. "Not for stress events." She pointed to the dataset feeding into the model. "These include high-yield bonds from the 2008 collapse," she continued. "The Gaussian model failed there. It underestimates how extreme losses can cluster." The room went still, again, because this wasn't abstract anymore. This was history, real, painful, expensive. Nina wrote a new function beside the original. "Clean, simple, different. This adjusts for tail dependence," she said. Calloway's head lifted slightly. "What does that change?" he asked. Nina didn't turn. "Your probability of simultaneous defaults," she said. "It goes from 0.3%, she wrote the number, to 4.1%. A breath left the room. Not loud, but sharp. Someone lowered their glass. Someone else muttered, "That's 13 times higher." Edward felt the floor tilt beneath him, just slightly. "But enough. That's theoretical," he said quickly. But the words didn't carry, not like they used to, because now, people weren't looking at him when he spoke. They were looking at her. Nina finished the section, moved to the next. Didn't pause, didn't slow. The second board began to fill. Her handwriting stayed consistent. Her breathing stayed even. But something had changed, not in her, in the room. The tension had shifted. It wasn't about whether she could do it anymore. It was about how much she would find, and how bad it would be. Edward stepped back, for the first time that night. Not dramatically, not visibly, just one step, but it was enough, because people noticed, they always did. Nina reached the end of page 5. She didn't celebrate, didn't react. She simply moved to the third board, and kept going. The live stream counter ticked higher, 500,000, then more. Comments flooded in, too fast to read. News alerts began lighting up phones in the room. A producer whispered, "This is going everywhere." Edward didn't hear him. He was watching Nina, watching the way she moved, the way she didn't look nervous, didn't look afraid, like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. And for the first time, that scared him, because if she kept going, if she didn't break, if she didn't make a mistake, then this wouldn't just be a loss. It would be something worse. Exposure. Nina paused again, her marker hovering. Her eyes locked on their screen. Something deeper this time. Something off. The room leaned in, waiting, because they had learned now, when Nina Carter stopped, something important was about to happen. The room felt it before she said a word. It wasn't just the pause. It was the way she held still, marker hovering in midair. Her eyes locked onto the projection like she had found something that didn't belong. The kind of stillness that makes people uneasy. Edward saw it, and for a brief, dangerous second, hope flickered. There it is, a mistake, a hesitation, the crack. He stepped forward slightly, voice rising just enough to reclaim the room. "Problem?" he asked, the edge returning to his tone. "I thought you had this under control." A few nervous laughs followed, not as strong as before, but enough. Enough to remind everyone who he was. Nina didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed on the screen. Then she turned, slowly, the whiteboards, the ones she had already filled. Her own work, she studied it line by line, as if comparing two worlds that no longer matched. A murmur moved through the room. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Did she mess up?" another asked quietly. Edward took another step forward, sensing the shift. "This is what happens," he said, louder now, turning slightly toward the audience, "when someone pretends to understand something far beyond their level." There it was, confidence, rebuilding, piece by piece. Nina finally spoke. "This doesn't match." Her voice was calm, too calm. Edward frowned. "What doesn't match?" Nina lifted the marker and pointed at the projection. "This section," she said. "Page 6, her finger traced a sequence of numbers. "These parameters, they're not consistent with the structure you built earlier." Edward's smile returned. "Or maybe," he said, spreading his hands slightly, "you're just lost." A few people nodded. That made sense, didn't it? 17 panels, thousands of variables. Of course she would lose track eventually. Of course she would. Nina shook her head, not in frustration, in certainty. "No," she said. The word landed flat. "Final." Then she turned back to the board and started again. From the top of that section, the room blinked. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. "She's restarting," the analyst said, barely able to keep up. "She's recalibrating." Edward's smile faltered, because that wasn't panic, that wasn't confusion, that was control. Nina rewrote the structure, faster this time but no less precise. Her marker moved with purpose, rebuilding the framework she had already mapped in her mind. She didn't complain, didn't accuse, didn't even acknowledge the disruption. She simply adapted. And that made it worse, because if she had broken, Edward could have ended it. If she had argued, he could have dismissed her. But this quiet, relentless correction, there was nothing to attack. 6 minutes passed. 6 long minutes where the room watched her rebuild something that had just been taken apart. The tension thickened. People shifted in their seats. Phones stayed raised. No one wanted to miss what came next. Nina finished the section, stepped back, and looked at it again. Then she turned to the screen and kept going. Page 7, clean. Page 8. A pause, not as long this time, but enough. Her marker tapped lightly against the board. Once, twice, then she circled a section near the bottom. "This part," she said, "uses overlapping windows for resampling." A few people frowned. "What does that mean?" someone asked. "It means," Nina continued, "you're introducing autocorrelation into your confidence intervals." The room went quiet. Again. Because even the people who didn't fully understand the math understood the tone, understood the implication. "It inflates your accuracy," she added, "makes your model look more stable than it is." Edward felt something cold crawl up his spine. He started. But he stopped. Because he didn't have a clean answer, not one that would hold. Not here. Not now. Nina corrected the section. 3 lines, simple, precise. The analyst leaned forward again, shaking his head slowly. "That drops the accuracy," he whispered. "How much?" the woman beside him asked. He swallowed. "A lot." Nina wrote the number. 71%, she said. The original projection behind her still read 94. The difference hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. A glass slipped slightly on a table. Someone cursed under their breath. Edward stepped back again. This time it wasn't subtle. His hand moved to the edge of the table, gripping it for just a second before letting go. Philip, his CFO, leaned closer. "Grant," he whispered, "we should stop this." Edward didn't respond, because he couldn't, because stopping it now would mean admitting it was real, and if it was real, then everything he had built tonight, everything he had shown, was already collapsing. Nina didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel it, the shift, the pressure changing, the weight moving. But she didn't slow down. She didn't savor it. She didn't react at all. She just kept working. Page 9, 10, 11. Her rhythm locked in again. Scan, identify, correct, move, the boards filled. The projection behind her started to look less like a masterpiece and more like a map of mistakes. The live stream counter surged, 1 million, then higher. Phones in the room buzzed with notifications, news outlets picking it up, clips already spreading. A producer whispered urgently, "This is global now." Edward heard that, and something inside him tightened, because this wasn't just a room anymore. This wasn't just investors. This was everywhere, and he couldn't control it. Nina reached the next section. Her marker slowed, then stopped. Again, the room leaned in. Not with doubt this time, with anticipation. Because they had learned now, when Nina Carter stopped, something deeper was about to be exposed. She stared at the screen, longer than before, her brow furrowed slightly, then she turned, not to the board, to Edward. And for the first time since this began, there was something different in her eyes, not uncertainty, not fear, something sharper. "Where did this data come from?" she asked. The question cut through the room. Edward blinked. "What? This section," Nina said, pointing to the projection. "It doesn't match the rest of your model." Edward straightened. "It's part of the system." "No," Nina said quietly. She stepped closer to the screen. "These parameters are different. The structure is different. Even the boundary conditions don't align with what you built before." The room went still, not curious, not tense, cold, because this wasn't about mistakes anymore. This was about something else, something worse. Nina turned back to him. "This page," she said, "was written separately." Edward didn't answer, didn't move, didn't blink, and in that silence, the room began to understand. Something was wrong, not with her, with him. The realization didn't come all at once. It spread, slowly, like a crack running through glass. No one spoke, no one moved, because in a room like this, where power lived in quiet nods and controlled expressions, truth didn't explode. It revealed itself in hesitation. In the way Edward Langston didn't answer, in the way his eyes didn't meet hers, in the way his hand, still resting near the edge of the table, tightened just slightly. Nina didn't step back. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, marker in hand, waiting. "You're mistaken," Edward said finally. The words came out flat, too quick, too practiced. Nina shook her head. "No," she said again, soft, certain. She turned back to the board and circled a number deep in the structure of the equation. "This constant," she said, "it's been manually overridden." A murmur rippled through the room. Not curiosity this time, something heavier, because even the people who didn't fully understand the math understood what that meant. Edward's voice sharpened. "That's standard adjustment." "It's not," Nina replied. She tapped the number again. "It breaks the convergence of the system. This equation doesn't solve anymore." The room went still. Again, but this time, it wasn't tension. It was disbelief. Because that wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a simplification. That was intentional. Nina turned to face him fully now, her eyes steady. "This page was designed to fail," she said. The words landed like a weight dropped from a height. A glass clinked against the table. Someone whispered, "No." Edward's jaw tightened. "That's absurd," he said. But he didn't step forward, didn't challenge her at the board, didn't take the marker. He stayed exactly where he was, and that, more than anything, confirmed it. The live stream chat exploded. Phones in the room buzzed all at once, screens lit up with messages, alerts, headlines forming in real time. Is this real? He rigged it. Did she just expose him? Nina didn't look at any of it. She turned back to the board, and in the silence, she fixed it. Her marker moved quickly now, not rushed, not frantic, just certain. She crossed out the overridden constant, rewrote it, rebuilt the structure around it, line by line, until the equation that had been broken was whole again. She stepped back. "Now it solves," she said. "No triumph, no edge, just truth." The clock on the wall ticked softly, 44 minutes and counting. Edward stared at the board. For the first time that night, he looked small, not physically, but in presence, in certainty, in control. He opened his mouth, closed it, then, "She cheated." The words cut through the room, sharp, desperate. The shift was immediate, not because people believed him, but because it gave them something else to hold on to. An escape. A way to explain what they had just seen, without changing what they believed about the world. "There's no way," Edward continued, louder now, stepping forward again, grabbing at the authority that had been slipping through his fingers. "No way someone with no training, no degree, no background walks in here and does this." A few heads nodded, not confidently, but enough. Enough to create doubt. "She had access," he said. "Someone fed her the model. This is corporate theft." The word hung there, theft, ugly, heavy, dangerous. The room shifted again, not back to him, but away from her, because doubt was easier than acceptance, easier than admitting that they had just watched someone they had dismissed. Outthink them all. The manager appeared at the edge of the room, Victor Crane, tall, rigid, always watching. He moved quickly now, stepping between Nina and the board. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but firm, "I need you to step away." Nina didn't move. "I didn't cheat," she said. "I understand," Crane replied, though his tone suggested he didn't want to understand. "But this is Mr. Langston's event." There it was, the line clear, unspoken until now. Power, ownership, whose space this really was. "I need you to collect your things," Crane continued. "You're done for the night." The words landed harder than anything Edward had said, because they were final, because they came from someone who controlled her reality, her job, her paycheck, her ability to go home and pay rent. "You're firing me?" Nina asked. Crane didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. The room watched. No one stepped in, not Calloway, not the analyst, not the investors who had just seen the truth unfold in front of them. They looked away, at their phones, at their glasses, at anything but her, because speaking now would cost them something, and people like them didn't pay costs like that. Nina stood in the middle of it all, 3 whiteboards behind her, a million eyes watching through screens she couldn't see, and not one person in the room willing to stand beside her. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from something deeper, heavier, the weight of knowing she was right, and that it didn't matter. She thought of Kayla, at home, probably watching, seeing this, learning from it. What would she take away? That truth didn't win, that it didn't matter how hard you worked, that someone with enough money could rewrite the ending. Nina reached for her apron, untied it slowly, folded it in her hands. For a moment, it looked like she was about to leave, and the room relaxed, just slightly, because that would make it easier, cleaner, contained. But Nina didn't move toward the door. She lifted her head and turned back. "I didn't cheat," she said again, quieter this time, but clearer, not to Edward, not to Crane, to the room, to the cameras, to her sister, and I can prove it. The words cut through the tension, sharp, immediate. Crane frowned. "Miss Carter, that's enough. Give me another problem," Nina said. The room stilled. "A new one," she continued. "One I've never seen." She stepped forward, back toward the board, her voice steady now. "Let someone else choose it." A pause. "Then, I'll solve it." The air shifted again, not doubt, not tension, something else, expectation, because this time, there would be no excuse, no argument, no way to explain it away. If she was right, if she could do it again, then everything that had just happened would become undeniable, The room held its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to step forward. The room held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Not a chair moved, not a voice spoke, because stepping forward now meant choosing a side. And in a room built on power, people didn't choose sides that could cost them. Nina stood there, alone in the center of it all, 3 whiteboards behind her, a lifetime of being unseen pressing against her back. Waiting. The silence stretched, then a chair scraped softly against the marble floor. It didn't echo loudly, but in that silence, it sounded like thunder. Heads turned, slowly, reluctantly, toward the back of the room. He hadn't been part of the evening. Not really. No one had introduced him. No one had poured him wine. No one had asked for his opinion, because he wasn't a guest. He was just there. Marcus Reed stepped forward. His uniform wasn't a suit. Dark work pants, a faded blue shirt with a maintenance badge clipped near the collar. His hands were rough. Not from shaking hands. From fixing things no one else wanted to touch. He moved carefully, like he understood the room he was walking into, but didn't belong to it and didn't care. I'll give her one. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, because it didn't ask for permission. It didn't need it. The room shifted again, confused now. A few people frowned. Edward blinked, thrown off balance for the first time in minutes. "Who are you?" he asked. Marcus didn't look at him, not right away. His eyes went to Nina first, just for a second. And in that look, something passed. Recognition, not of who she was, but of what she had just stood through. "I work here," Marcus said simply, a few quiet chuckles, dismissive, safe. Edward let out a short breath. "This isn't your concern," Marcus nodded once. "I know," he said. Then he stepped closer. "But it's the right thing." The words didn't fit the room. They didn't belong among the polished shoes and measured voices and careful calculations. And that made them louder. Edward's smile returned, thin, strained. "This isn't a charity event." Marcus shrugged slightly. Didn't say it was. He turned his attention to the board, to the space Nina had left open. "Someone else wanted to pick the problem," he said. "You said that." Nina watched him, really watched him, not the uniform, not the position, the choice, because no one else had made it, not when it mattered. Edward exhaled slowly. This was getting out of control. "You," he said, a hint of disbelief creeping in. "You're going to challenge this." Marcus met his eyes now, calm, unmoved. "I'm giving her a fair shot." The room murmured again, not laughter this time, something quieter, because fairness wasn't something this room practiced. A voice from the back cut through the tension. "I'll write the problem." Everyone turned. She stood near the last table, unassuming at first glance. No jewelry, no flash, just a black blazer and a white blouse. But the moment she stepped forward, the room straightened because they knew her. Dr. Eleanor Voss, MIT. A name that didn't need introduction. A reputation built not on money, but on something rarer, respect. Edward's expression shifted again. "Dr. Voss," he said, forcing politeness into his tone. She didn't acknowledge it. She walked straight to the board, picked up a marker, and began to write. The equation she placed there wasn't long, not like Edward's. It didn't need to be. 3 lines, clean, elegant. But the moment it appeared, the analyst inhaled sharply. "That's," he whispered. "What?" someone asked. He didn't answer, because he couldn't, not without admitting what it was. A problem no one had solved. Not fully, not yet. Dr. Voss capped the marker and stepped back. "No tricks," she said. Her voice was steady, measured. "Fair. Take your time." Nina stepped closer. Her eyes scanned the equation. Once, twice, her lips moved slightly, mapping it, feeling it, understanding it. The room waited. No one laughed. No one whispered. Because this time, there was nothing to hide behind. No excuses, no narrative. just truth. Nina picked up the marker, her fingers steadier than before. Not because the pressure was less, but because something inside her had shifted. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to Edward, not to the room, not even to the cameras. She was doing what she had always done. Solving. She wrote the first line. Simple, expected. The second, different. The analyst leaned forward again. That's not the standard approach, he murmured. Dr. Voss's eyes narrowed slightly, watching, closely now. Nina didn't pause. She didn't explain. She moved through it like she had been here before. Like this wasn't foreign ground. Like this was home. Minutes passed. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft rhythm of the marker against the board. And somewhere, deep in their quiet, something began to change. Not in Nina, in the way the room saw her. Because this wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was something else. Something undeniable. Dr. Voss stepped closer, her eyes following every line, every transition, every choice. And for the first time that night, she didn't look curious. She looked surprised. Nina wrote the final line, underlined it, then stepped back. The board stood between them, simple, clean, complete. The room waited. Because now, it wasn't about Nina anymore. It was about the answer. Dr. Voss read it, slowly, carefully, her finger tracing each step, each connection, each leap. 30 seconds, then a minute, then she stopped and turned. Her voice was quiet, but it carried farther than anything else that night. This is correct. The words didn't explode. They settled. Deep, unavoidable. Then she continued. And this method, she looked back at the board, then at Nina. I've never seen it before. The room broke, not into laughter, not into whispers, into something else, something real. Because in that moment, there was no more doubt, no more excuses, no more hiding. Just truth. Standing in the center of the room, in an apron, holding a marker, and for the first time, everyone saw her. Not the apron, not the role, not the assumptions they had placed on her the moment she walked into the room. They saw the mind, the discipline, the quiet force that had been there all along. The silence that followed Dr. Voss's words didn't break right away. It deepened, like something sacred had just been spoken. And no one wanted to be the first to disturb it. Then, one clap, soft, sharp, the young analyst. He didn't hesitate this time. He clapped again and again. The sound echoed against marble and glass, filling the space that had once held laughter. A woman near the front stood slowly, her hands coming together, then another and another, until the room, this room that had measured worth in numbers and status and power, rose to its feet. Applause, real, unfiltered. Some of it hesitant, some of it emotional, but all of it undeniable. Nina didn't move. She stood in front of the board, her hands still at her sides, the marker resting lightly between her fingers. Her chest rose and fell slowly, like she was remembering how to breathe. Because for a moment, she hadn't. Not since she stepped up there. Not since the room turned against her. Not since she realized that being right didn't mean being protected. The sound washed over her, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet, because she knew something the room was only just beginning to understand. This wasn't over. Edward Langston hadn't moved. He sat at the edge of the table now, his posture stiff, his face drained of color. The confidence that had once filled the room around him had collapsed inward, leaving something smaller behind. But not gone. Not yet. He stood, slowly. The applause softened, then faded, because even now, he still held something. Power, reputation, influence, and people like him didn't fall quietly. This proves nothing. The words came out steady, careful, controlled. A few people shifted, not convinced, but uncertain, because doubt, once planted, didn't disappear easily. Edward stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Nina. You solved a problem, he said. A difficult one, I'll admit. His voice carried again, Not strong, but practiced. But that doesn't explain how you had access to my model earlier. There it was, the angle, the lifeline, a way to rewrite what had just happened. She didn't, the analyst said quietly from behind. Edward didn't look at him. She had to, Edward continued, raising his voice just slightly. There's no other explanation. The room wavered, not fully, but enough, because belief didn't change in an instant. It bent, slowly, under pressure. Nina watched him, not angry, not defensive, just tired. Because she had seen this before, not like this, not on this scale, but the pattern. It was familiar. You prove yourself, and someone moves the line. You cross it, and they move it again. Edward took another step forward. This isn't about intelligence, he said. It's about integrity. The word landed differently now, sharper, more dangerous. A few heads nodded again. Not confidently, but enough to create space. Enough to make the room hesitate, and hesitation was all Edward needed. Victor Crane stepped in again, his presence firm now. Miss Carter, he said, we've allowed this to go far enough. The applause had stopped completely. The energy in the room shifted again, not toward Edward, not toward Nina, toward resolution, control, containment. We'll need you to step away, Crane continued. Nina didn't move, not this time, because something had changed, not in the room, in her. She looked at Edward, really looked, and for the first time, she saw him clearly, not as a figure, not as a force, but as a man who had built something powerful and was watching it slip. A man who couldn't accept what stood in front of him because it didn't fit the world he believed in. She turned, not to leave, but to the board, the original one, the one where it had all started. Her marker lifted, and without asking, without explaining, she began to write. Again, the room leaned in, confused, curious. Nina rewrote the original equation, from memory, line by line, every symbol, every number, every connection. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate, didn't look at the screen because she didn't need to. When she finished, she stepped back and pointed. This is what I saw, she said. Then she circled the error, the very first one, the one that started everything. Silence, heavy, final. Then she turned to Edward. You didn't need to believe me, she said. You just needed to check. The words didn't accuse, they didn't attack, they revealed. Edward stared at the board, at the equation, at the correction, at the moment where everything had begun to unravel. And for the first time, there was no argument left, no angle, no narrative, just truth, standing there, unmoved, unshaken, unavoidable. The room felt it, all of it, the weight, the shift, the realization. This wasn't a performance, this wasn't luck, this wasn't theft, this was something real, and it had been standing in front of them the entire time. Dr. Voss stepped forward again, her voice softer now, but no less certain. What you did tonight, she said, looking at Nina, is something most people spend their lives trying to understand. Nina didn't answer, because she didn't know what to say, because she had never imagined being here, because part of her still felt like she didn't belong in this moment. Even as it unfolded around her, Dr. Voss continued. I'd like to offer you something, she said. The room leaned in again, not with tension, with anticipation. A place at MIT, she said. Full scholarship, research position. The words hung in the air. Unreal, too big, too sudden. Nina blinked, once, twice, as if trying to wake up from something that didn't feel possible. The room exhaled, soft, collective, because now they understood. This wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point. A line crossed. A life about to change. And yet, in the middle of it all, Nina's eyes moved, not to Edward, not to the cameras, not to the board, to the back of the room, where Marcus stood, quiet, still, uncelebrated, the only person who had stepped forward when no one else would. And in that glance, something deeper settled. Because Nina Carter knew exactly who had changed everything. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't the cameras. It wasn't even the offer from MIT, still hanging in the air like something too big to touch. It was the man standing near the back of the room. Marcus Reed hadn't moved. Not when the room stood to applaud. Not when Dr. Voss made her offer. Not when Nina rewrote a system that had taken a team months to build. He stood the same way he had before. Quiet, hands at his sides, like he didn't expect anything from it, like he never had. Nina took a step away from the board. The room followed her movement instinctively, as if the center of gravity had shifted with her. She walked past the whiteboards, past the projection, past Edward Langston, who stood frozen in place, the weight of everything pressing down on him. And she kept walking, toward the back, toward Marcus. A few people exchanged glances, confused, because this wasn't what they expected. Not the moment, not the direction. But Nina didn't hesitate. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the faint grease marks still caught in the lines of his hands. Close enough to notice the tiredness in his eyes, the kind that didn't come from one long day, but from years of carrying something heavier than most people ever saw. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Marcus shifted slightly, almost uncomfortable with the attention. "You didn't need me," he replied. Nina shook her head. "Yes, I did." The room watched. Quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one felt different, warmer, more human. "You stepped in," Nina continued, "when no one else would." Marcus let out a small breath, glancing down for a second before meeting her eyes again. "I've got a daughter," he said. The words came simple, unpolished. "Real. She's about your sister's age," he added. Nina's expression softened. "I wouldn't want her watching something like this and thinking no one would stand up." The sentence settled into the room, deeper than anything else that night. Because it wasn't about math. It wasn't about money. It was about something people didn't talk about in places like this. What kind of example they left behind. Nina nodded slowly. "Her name?" she asked. "Lila," Marcus said. A small smile touched his face for the first time. "She's smarter than me already," Nina smiled back. "She's lucky," she said. Marcus shook his head lightly. "No," he said. "I think I am." Behind them the room shifted again, but this time it wasn't tension. It was reflection. Dr. Voss watched quietly, her expression thoughtful. Calloway stood near the front, his arms crossed, not in defense, but in consideration. Even the analyst had lowered his phone. Because what was happening now wasn't something you recorded, it was something you felt. Edward Langston hadn't moved. Not really. He stood near the table, the checkbook still in his hand. Though he hadn't realized he was holding it, the applause, the offer, the recognition. It had all happened around him, without him. For a man who had built his life on being at the center of every room, it was a kind of silence he had never experienced before. He stepped forward, slowly. The room noticed. Of course they did. They always did. Edward approached Nina and Marcus, stopping just a few feet away. His voice, when it came, was quieter than anyone expected. "I made an offer," he said. The words felt different now, less like a challenge, more like something that needed to be resolved. He opened the checkbook. His pen moved across the paper with practiced precision. $5 million. The number looked smaller on paper than it had sounded out loud. But the weight of it, that was real. He tore the check free, held it out, not meeting Nina's eyes. For a moment, she didn't take it. Not because she didn't need it, but because the moment wasn't about the money, not anymore. Then she reached out, took it, folded it once, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron, the same pocket she used for order pads, for pens, for small things. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Calloway stepped forward next, pulling a card from his jacket. "You call me," he said, handing it to her. "Monday morning." His tone wasn't casual, it wasn't polite. It was serious. "I fund education initiatives," he added. "Real ones." 2 more investors approached, then another, cards extended, hands offered, faces that had once laughed, now looked different, not guilty, not exactly, but aware. Nina accepted the cards quietly, without excitement, without rush, because she understood something they were only just beginning to realize. Opportunity didn't change who you were, it revealed it. Dr. Voss stepped closer again. "My offer stands," she said gently. Nina nodded. "Thank you," she replied. Her voice was steadier now, not because the moment had passed, but because she had stepped through it, on the other side. Edward stood there for a second longer. Then he spoke again. "I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was honest, and in a room like this, that mattered." Nina met his eyes. "Most people do," she said. "Not sharp, not bitter, just true." Edward nodded once, then stepped back. And for the first time that night, he looked like a man who understood exactly what he had lost. Nina reached up and untied her apron. The knot came loose easily, like it had been waiting. She folded it carefully, set it down on the table, the same table where she had served drinks just hours before, the same table where she had been invisible. She turned and walked toward the door, not rushed, not hesitant, just forward. The room parted slightly as she passed, people stepping aside, not out of obligation, out of something else. Respect. At the back, Marcus remained where he was. He didn't follow, didn't try to stop her. He just watched as she walked out of the room and into something entirely new. The doors closed behind her. Soft, final, but the story wasn't finished yet. Outside, Manhattan breathed differently. The doors of the Sterling closed behind Nina with a soft, almost gentle click, but the world beyond them was louder, colder, more real. Taxi horns echoed down the street. Headlights streaked across wet pavement, and the night air carried that sharp edge of early winter. Nina stepped onto the sidewalk, for the first time in nearly an hour. No one was watching her. No cameras, no investors, no chandeliers. Just the city. She stood there for a moment, her hand still resting near the pocket where the folded check sat. $5 million. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like anything at all. What she felt instead was quiet, a kind of quiet she hadn't known in a long time. Her breath came out slow, visible in the cold. Then the door behind her opened again. Nina turned. Marcus stepped out, pulling the door closed gently behind him. He didn't rush, didn't call out. He just walked towards her, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You okay?" he asked. Nina let out a small breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. "I think so," she said. Marcus nodded, hands in his pockets. "You handled that better than most people I know," he said. Nina looked at him. Really looked this time. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Back there." Marcus shrugged slightly. "I know, but you did." He shifted his weight, glancing down the street before answering. "Sometimes," he said, "you see something that ain't right, and you either walk past it or you don't." Nina smiled faintly. "That's simple for me," Marcus said. "It has to be." A bus roared past, sending a gust of wind between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The city kept moving, like nothing had happened. Inside, a world had shifted. Out here, life went on. My daughter's probably watching clips of that right now, Marcus added, a small smile forming. She's gonna have questions. Nina's expression softened. Kayla, too, she said quietly. They stood there in the glow of a streetlight, two people from very different paths, connected by one moment neither of them had planned. You heading home? Marcus asked. Yeah, Nina said. Bronx. Marcus nodded. Same direction for a bit, they started walking, side by side. No rush, no destination that needed to be reached faster than their thoughts could catch up. A few blocks passed before Nina spoke again. You ever think about something bigger? She asked. Marcus glanced at her. Bigger than what? This, she said, gesturing vaguely. Fixing things, building things. Something that changes more than just one moment. Marcus smiled slightly. All the time, he said. Nina looked at him, surprised. But I got responsibilities, he added. My daughter, bills. Life doesn't always leave room for big plans. Nina nodded slowly. She understood that, more than most. They reached the subway entrance. The stairs leading down disappeared into dim yellow light, the hum of trains echoing faintly below. Marcus stopped. This is me, he said. Nina hesitated, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out one of the cards she had been given inside, Calloway's, and another. Then she looked at Marcus. You should take one, she said. He shook his head immediately. No, that's yours. I know, Nina said, but I wouldn't have any of this without you. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That's not why I stepped in. I know, she said again, and that was exactly why she held the card out. Marcus looked at it, then at her, then back at the card. Slowly, he took it, not because he wanted something, but because he understood what she was really offering. A door, the kind that didn't open often. Thank you, he said quietly. Nina nodded. No, she replied. Thank you. Marcus gave a small smile, then turned toward the stairs. Halfway down, he paused, looked back. You did something tonight, he said. Don't let anyone tell you different. Then he disappeared into the subway. Nina stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. Home. The Bronx felt different that night, not because it had changed, but because she had. The streetlights flickered the same way, the buildings leaned just as tired, the air carried the same mix of noise and quiet survival, but Nina walked through it with something new in her chest. Not pride, not exactly, something steadier, a kind of knowing. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, fumbled with the key for a second, then pushed the door open. Kayla was already there, sitting cross-legged on the couch, phone in her hand, eyes wide. Nina! She jumped up so fast the phone nearly slipped from her grip. That was you, right? She asked, breathless. On the video, everyone's posting it. Nina barely had time to nod before Kayla wrapped her arms around her. Tight, like she was afraid to let go. I knew it, Kayla said into her shoulder. I knew you were smart like that. Nina closed her eyes for a second, held her. Yeah, she whispered. I guess you did. Kayla pulled back, grabbing her phone again. Look, she said, scrolling quickly. They're calling you everything. Genius, miracle. Some professor offered you something. Nina smiled softly. I know, she said. Kayla stopped scrolling. Looked at her. Is it real? She asked. Nina hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded check, set it on the small kitchen table. Kayla stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't speak, because some things didn't feel real until you let them sit. It's real, Nina said. Kayla let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Then she looked back at her sister. You're not staying here, are you? She asked quietly. Nina walked over to the sink, turned on the water, let it run for a moment. Then she turned back. "I'm not leaving you," she said. Kayla nodded slowly, because that was the only answer that mattered. Nina looked around the apartment. The worn couch, the cracked paint, the stack of books in the corner. Everything that had built her. Everything that had shaped her. And for the first time, she didn't feel trapped by it. She felt grateful, because without it, she wouldn't have been ready. She wouldn't have seen what others missed. She wouldn't have stood in that room and changed everything. Nina turned off the light in the kitchen. The room settled into quiet. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, something new had begun, and this time, it wasn't something that could be taken away. Morning came quietly. No cameras, no applause. Just pale sunlight slipping through the thin curtains of Nina's apartment, landing softly across the worn kitchen table where the check still sat. $5 million. It looked smaller in daylight, less like a miracle, more like a decision. Nina stood at the sink, staring out at the street below. People moved the same way they always did. Fast, focused, carrying lives no one else stopped to see. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. Behind her, Kayla was already awake, sitting at the table, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the check without touching it. "You're really going, aren't you?" she asked. Nina didn't turn right away. She watched a bus pass, a man in a work jacket stepping off, coffee in hand, life moving forward. Then she turned. "Yeah," she said softly. "I am." Kayla nodded. Not sad, not scared, just understanding, because she had always known Nina didn't belong here, not in the way the world defined belonging. "You're still my sister, though," Kayla added. Nina smiled. Always. 6 months later, the air felt different. Cambridge, Massachusetts didn't carry the same weight as the Bronx. The buildings stood taller, cleaner. The sidewalks echoed with quieter steps. Even the air felt deliberate. Nina walked across the MIT campus, a notebook tucked under her arm, the same kind she had always used, 70 cents, plain, unimpressive, but filled with something no one could measure. She moved through the crowd without rushing, her steps steady, her eyes focused. Around her, students talked in quick bursts, equations and ideas, slipping into conversation like second nature. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible, not because people stared, but because they listened. Inside the lecture hall, the room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Dr. Voss stood at the front, reviewing notes, her presence as calm and grounded as it had been that night in Manhattan. Nina took her seat. Front row, not because she needed to prove anything, but because that's where she had always wanted to be. Dr. Voss looked up. Their eyes met. A small nod passed between them. Respect, earned, not given. The lecture began. Numbers filled the board. Complex, layered, alive. Nina's pen moved across the page, her mind already working ahead, connecting ideas, building structures no one else could see yet. This wasn't new. It was just finally seen. Back in New York, the city kept moving. It always did. Marcus Reed stood outside a small grocery store, a bag of groceries in one hand, his phone in the other. The screen lit up with a video. Nina, standing at a podium, speaking, confident, clear. The caption read, "From waitress to MIT researcher, Nina Carter's story inspires millions." Marcus watched quietly. Behind him, a small voice called out, "Dad!" Lila ran toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "You're late," she said, smiling. Marcus chuckled. Yeah, I know." She glanced at his phone. "Is that her?" she asked. Marcus nodded. Lila leaned closer, watching the video. "She's really smart," she said. Marcus smiled. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Lila looked up at him. Are you proud of her? Marcus paused, then nodded once. Yeah, he said again. I am. Lila grinned. I think she's going to change a lot of things. Marcus looked back at the screen, at Nina, at the way she stood now. No apron, no hesitation, no room trying to push her down. Just her, and everything she had always been. Maybe, he said quietly. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded card. Calloway's. Still there. Still untouched. Not because he didn't need it, but because he understood something most people didn't. Opportunity wasn't just about taking. It was about timing, about readiness, about knowing when the door you walked through was the one meant for you. He slipped the card back into his pocket. Come on, he said to Lila. Let's get home. They walked down the street together, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just a father and his daughter. Moving forward, that night, Nina sat at her desk, the campus quiet around her, her notebook open, a fresh page waiting. She stared at it for a moment, then began to write. Not for anyone else, not for applause, not for recognition, just because it was there, because it mattered, because it always had. Her phone buzzed, a message, unknown number. She opened it. A photo appeared, Marcus and Lila, standing outside the grocery store, smiling. Below it, a single line, keep going, we're watching. Nina smiled, not wide, not loud, just enough. She set the phone down, looked at the page again, then kept writing. Because some people wait their whole lives to be seen, and some pick up a marker and make the world look. That night, Nina Carter didn't just solve an equation. She rewrote the moment when Marcus Reed chose to stand up quietly, when no one else would. Sometimes, the biggest turning point in a life doesn't come from talent alone. It comes from one person deciding not to look away. And the truth is, courage doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes in work boots, standing at the back of the room. So today, think about this. When you see something that isn't right, don't wait for someone else to step in. Do what Marcus did. Just take one step forward, even if no one's watching. If this story meant something to you, comment 1 below. And tell me, have you ever stood up for someone when no one else did? There's another story coming up, one that might make you see courage in a completely different way.